I sat at the head of a crowded family dinner table, looked my mother dead in the eye, and began handing out 23 color-coded packets of financial receipts to our extended family. Her face instantly drained of color. For 6 years, my mother had convinced every single person in that room that I was a heartless, wealthy monster who had completely abandoned them. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly sending her $1,200 a month to save my childhood home from foreclosure. I ate ramen and lived in a freezing studio apartment just to keep them afloat. But when I finally pulled the public property records, I discovered a sickening truth. The house had been paid off for 7 years. My mother had faked a foreclosure to steal $86,000 from me, all to fund my golden child sister's luxury lifestyle, so I didn't accept the invitation to her lavish family dinner just to eat. I came to audit my own mother in front of everyone she had ever lied to. Before we get into the details of exactly how this showdown happened, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching this from and what time is it there right now? I always love seeing where this community is tuning in from. The sky over the University of Washington wasn't just gray. It was the color of a bruised ego. I stood in the tunnel of the Husky Stadium, the polyester of my black gown sticking to my skin in the humid June heat. My heart was doing a frantic percussion against my ribs. Today wasn't just about a degree in architecture, it was the finish line of a 4-year marathon I'd run while working 30 hours a week at a 24-hour diner, smelling like old grease and broken dreams. Row 14, seat 12, I whispered to myself, clutching my decorated mortarboard. I had sent the map to my parents 3 times. I'd highlighted the parking garage in neon yellow. I had even paid for their hotel room closer to campus so there would be no excuses. As the processional music began, that steady, haunting drone of pomp and circumstance, I marched out onto the field. My eyes went straight to section 204, row 14, empty, not just late empty, not looking for a seat empty, it was a literal void. 3 vacant plastic chairs sat like a taunt between a cheering family in matching t-shirts and an elderly man weeping with pride for someone who wasn't me. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I shouldn't have looked. We were supposed to be present, but the silence from that row was screaming at me. I slipped my phone out. It wasn't a text from my mother, Alina, saying they were stuck in traffic. It was an Instagram notification. I clicked it, and the world seemed to tilt. There was my sister Sloane standing in the center of our parents' backyard, a massive "She Said Yes" banner hung behind her. My father was popping a bottle of vintage champagne, the foam frozen in the frame like a celebratory explosion. My mother was beaming, her hand resting adoringly on the shoulder of Sloane's new fiancé, a guy whose name I could never remember because he changed career goals as often as he changed his socks. The caption read, "The only thing better than a proposal is having the whole family here to witness the start of a new chapter. Family comes first, always." The timestamp was 30 minutes ago. While I was adjusting my tassels and preparing to walk across a stage to claim a future I had built with my own blood and sweat. They were clinking glasses to celebrate Sloane's ability to pick out a diamond. Elara Vance, the voice of the dean, cracked through my trance. I was at the front of the line. I didn't feel the handshake. I didn't hear the applause. I took the leather-bound folder, the weight of it feeling like a tombstone rather than a trophy. I didn't go to the reception. I didn't take photos with the fountain. I walked straight to my rusted-out sedan, stripped off the gown, throwing it into the backseat like a piece of trash, and drove. I didn't drive to my parents' house for the after-party. I knew I wasn't invited to. I drove toward the interstate. I called my mother once. She picked up on the fourth ring, the sound of a cheering crowd and upbeat jazz in the background. "Alara, honey, did you get your little paper?" Her voice was airy, distracted. "Listen, Sloane's engagement is it's a whirlwind. We're so sorry about the ceremony, but you know how your sister gets. She needed the big reveal today, and we couldn't let her down. You're so independent anyway, you don't need us holding your hand. Right? I'm moving, Mom," I said, my voice as flat as the horizon I was chasing. "Moving? Where? To the apartment across town?" "Chicago," I lied. I was actually heading toward Boston, but I wanted a buffer. "I start a junior firm position on Monday. Don't worry about the hand-holding. I think I've had enough of it to last a lifetime." I hung up before she could ask if I'd be home for dinner. I looked at the empty passenger seat where my graduation flowers should have been. There was nothing there but my architectural portfolio and a cold, hardening resolve. That was the day I realized that in the blueprints of my family, I wasn't a load-bearing wall. I was just the scrap wood used to keep the fire going for everyone else. As the Seattle skyline faded in my rearview mirror, I made a silent vow they would never see me fail, but more importantly, they would never again see me for free. Boston was a city of red brick and cold shoulders, which suited me perfectly. I buried myself in blueprints and structural steel, working for a firm that valued my precision more than my personality. For 2 years, I was a ghost to my family, a few hollow holiday texts, a congrats on Sloane's third career change until the phone rang on a Tuesday night in November. My mother's voice wasn't airy this time, it was brittle, laced with the kind of practiced tremors that usually preceded a request for a small favor. Alara, I didn't want to call. I know you're so busy with your big city life, she started, the guilt trip already idling at the curb. But your father's back, it's acting up again. He's missed 3 weeks at the warehouse, and the bank, they sent a notice. The mortgage on the family home, the one you grew up in, Alara, they're threatening to take it. I felt a familiar tug at my solar plexus. Despite the empty seats at my graduation, the house represented the only stability I'd ever known. How much, Mom? I asked, my hand tightening on my drafting pencil. 1,200 a month just until your father is back on his feet. It's a drop in the bucket for someone with your salary, right? We ask Sloane, but, well, she's trying to get her floral boutique off the ground and her husband is between ventures again. I looked at my bank account. I was finally starting to save for my own place, a small condo in the Seaport District. $1,200 was exactly my monthly savings goal. I'll do it, I said. But I need to see the statements. Oh, don't worry about the paperwork, honey. I'll handle the bank, you just send it to my personal account so I can walk the check over, it's faster that way. And there's one more thing. The one more thing was a $22,000 car loan. Elena claimed the old minivan had finally died and they needed a reliable SUV to get my father to his physical therapy appointments. Because of his missed work, his credit was shot. Mine, however, was pristine. I'm the only one keeping this family afloat, Alara, she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. If we lose the car, we lose everything. I'm not telling Sloane or your father how bad it is. I don't want to worry them. This is our little secret, our way of looking out for each other. I felt a perverse sense of pride. For the first time in my life, I was the important one. I wasn't the girl crying in a stadium. I was the silent engine. I signed the digital papers for the SUV and set up the recurring $1,200 transfer. For the next 4 years, the temporary mortgage assistance became a permanent fixture of my budget. Every time I mentioned stopping, Alina had a new catastrophe, a leaky roof, a property tax hike, a special assessment from the neighborhood. You're our angel, Alara, she would say. Usually right before hanging up to go to a brunch I wasn't invited to. I lived in a cramped studio with a radiator that hissed like a cornered cat. I wore the same coat for 3 winters. I skipped vacations and ate ramen over my light table. Meanwhile, on social media, I watched the family thrive. There was Sloane at a vineyard, posing in front of a sleek white SUV, my SUV with a caption about manifesting your dreams. There were my parents hosting lavish 4th of July barbecues with professional catering. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I was the pillar, I was the architect of their safety. But as the years ticked by, the $1,200 transfers started to feel less like a helping hand and more like a ransom payment for a love I was never actually going to receive. I had sent over $80,000 into a black hole labeled home, never realizing that while I was building their foundation, they were busy excavating mine. Life in Boston took a turn for the better when I met Julian. He wasn't an architect, but he appreciated structure. As a senior forensic accountant, Julian didn't look at the world in shapes and shadows. He looked at it in balance sheets and tax codes. We were sitting in my studio apartment, the one with the peeling wallpaper I couldn't afford to fix because $1,200 of my paycheck vanished every month like clockwork. I was hunched over a spread of bank statements trying to figure out how to squeeze out enough for a new set of tires. Alara, Julian said, leaning over his laptop, his brow furrowed behind his glasses. I've been looking at your debt-to-income ratio for the condo application we talked about, this mortgage support line. You've been paying it for 6 years. Yeah, I sighed, rubbing my temples. My parents' place in Seattle. It's a lot, I know, but if they lose the house, they have nowhere to go. Julian tapped a pen against his chin. Seattle property records are public, Alara. Out of curiosity and professional habit, I did a quick title search this afternoon. I froze. And the mortgage on 1422 Willow Lane was satisfied in full 7 years ago, he said, his voice dropping to that low, cautious tone he used when delivering bad news to clients. Specifically, 4 months before you started sending that first $1,200 check. Your mother filed the deed of reconveyance herself. The room went silent. The only sound was the radiator's rhythmic metallic clanking. That's impossible, I whispered. Mom says the bank is breathing down their necks every month. She sends me notices while she describes them over the phone. She says the property taxes tripled. Julian didn't say a word. He just turned his laptop screen toward me. There it was, a PDF of a scanned document from the King County Records Office. It was signed by my mother. The house was owned free and clear. There was no mortgage. There was no phantom bank threatening to take their home. She's been pocketing it, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the stomach. For 72 months, Julian, that's over $86,000. It gets worse, Julian said softly. He pulled up another tab. I looked into the SUV loan you co-signed. The payments have been coming from your account, but the registration, it was transferred into Sloane's name 2 years ago as a gift from your mother. You've been paying for your sister's car while you take the bus to work. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling an architect gets when they realize a building is structurally unsound and must be demolished for public safety. Every I love you from my mother, every you're our angel was just a transaction. I wasn't her daughter. I was a high-yield savings account she didn't have to pay taxes on. She thinks I'm a fool, I muttered, staring at the $86,400 figure Julian had circled on his notepad. She thinks because I'm independent and successful, she can harvest my life to fertilize Sloane's. What do you want to do? Julian asked. He wasn't pushing me, he was offering me the tools. I looked at the folder of evidence he had printed out, the property records, the car registration, the bank timelines. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. I spent my career learning how to build things that last, I said, standing up and closing the laptop. But my mother, she's a master of illusions. I think it's time I show her what happens when you pull the curtain back on a house of cards. I didn't call her, I didn't scream. I simply went to my desk, took out a heavy manila envelope, and began to organize the papers. The final crack in the foundation didn't come from a bank statement, it came from a phone call with my uncle Silas. Silas was my father's older brother, a retired carpenter who lived in a small cabin 3 hours outside Seattle. He was the only one who had ever sent me a birthday card that didn't include a subtle hint about helping out the family. I called him under the guise of checking in, but my heart was heavy with the weight of the $86,400 lie. Elara, is that you? Silas sounded surprised, his voice gravelly. I haven't heard from you in a dog's age. I figured you were still too busy to talk to the common folk back home. I frowned, leaning against my drafting table. Too busy. Silas, I've been working 60-hour weeks, but I'm never too busy for a phone call. I've sent Mom 3 messages this month alone. There was a long, uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. That's not what Alina tells the family, Alara, Silas said, his tone shifting to something more somber. At the Thanksgiving dinner last year, the one you declined to attend, she told everyone you'd become quite the elitist. Said you told her flat out that our small-town problems were beneath you and that you didn't want to be bothered by family anymore. I felt the air leave my lungs. She said what? She said you decut them off, that you were living in a penthouse and didn't care if they starved. She even cried, Alara. She told us how hard it was to watch Sloane struggle while you hoarded your wealth. I'll be honest, kid. Half the cousins have blocked your number because they think you've turned into some kind of corporate monster. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. My mother wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my identity. She was using my hard-earned success as a weapon to isolate me, ensuring that I would never talk to the extended family, because if I did, the truth about the $1,200 monthly payments would come out. She was murdering my reputation to keep her ATM hidden and silent. Silas, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I didn't decline Thanksgiving. I wasn't even invited, and for the last 6 years I've been paying their mortgage, or at least, I thought I was. I've sent them nearly $90,000. I heard a sharp intake of breath. 90,000, Alara, that house has been paid off since before you graduated. My brother bragged about it at a bowling league years ago. Alina told him the money for the party came from an inheritance. The image of my mother at my graduation, the one she skipped, flashed in my mind. She had been building this narrative for years. I was the selfish scapegoat, and Sloane was the golden victim. It was a perfect ecosystem of manipulation. She's been telling everyone I abandoned them, I whispered. She's been controlling the story, Alara, Silas said firmly. And as long as she's the only one talking, she's the one who's right. I looked at the manila envelope sitting on my desk. It was no longer just a collection of financial documents. It was a rebuttal. My mother had spent years painting a portrait of me as a cold, distant stranger. She didn't realize that I was an architect, and I knew exactly how to tear down a facade. Thanks, Silas, I said, my voice now deathly calm. I think it's time I came home for a visit. I think the corporate monster needs to make an appearance at the next family gathering. I didn't just move into my new home, I staged it like a gallery. After 6 years of living in a studio that smelled like damp plaster, I finally closed on a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Charles River. It was a triumph of minimalist design, concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a terrace that made you feel like you were floating above the city. Julian watched me as I carefully angled my phone. You're going to post it? Oh, I'm going to do more than post it, I said, my thumb hovering over the screen. I'm going to tag the location. I want the algorithm to deliver this directly to my mother's morning coffee. I uploaded the photo. New beginnings in a new space. Finally, a view that matches the work I've put in. The trap was set. It took exactly 42 minutes. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It wasn't a text, it was a FaceTime call from my mother. I let it ring until the very last second. When I answered, I didn't smile. I just looked at her through the high-definition lens of my laptop, making sure the sweeping skyline of Boston was visible behind me. Alara, my goodness, honey. Alina's face was a mask of artificial wonder. She looked older, her hair a bit thinner, but her eyes were as sharp as ever, scanning the room behind me for dollar signs. Is that your new place? It looks so expensive, so lonely. It's perfect, Mom, I said. What can I do for you? Well, she sighed, dabbing at her eyes with a silk scarf I'd bought her for Christmas. I hate to even bring this up, especially seeing you so comfortable, but things are dire here. Sloane's boutique is facing an eviction notice, and her husband, well, he's had some bad luck with an investment. If we don't find $50,000 by the end of the month, they're going to lose everything. I've been praying for a miracle, and then I saw your post. The audacity was breathtaking. She was asking for $50,000, nearly the exact amount she had already stolen plus interest. That's a lot of money, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We're family, Alara, and besides, I'm hosting a huge reunion dinner this Sunday. Uncle Silas is coming, your cousins from Oregon, everyone. It's a celebration of resilience. We'd love for you to fly in. It's been so long since the family saw you. It would mean the world to your father, and it would give us a chance to discuss the transfer in person. She thought she was cornering me. She thought that by surrounding me with the family members she had poisoned against me, I would be too embarrassed or too guilt-ridden to say no. She wanted to play the successful daughter card in front of an audience to force my hand. I'll be there, Mom, I said. I'll book the flight tonight, and don't worry, I'll bring everything we need to settle the books. Oh, you're a lifesaver, Alara. I'll tell everyone you're coming home to save the day. I hung up and looked at Julian. He was already holding the manila envelope. You're sure about this? He asked. Once you open that envelope at a dinner table, there's no going back. I spent 6 years building their house, I said, sliding the property records and the car registration into my briefcase. It's time I show them the bill. I wasn't flying back to Seattle to be the savior. I was flying back to be the auditor. The air in my parents' dining room was thick with the scent of rosemary chicken and the suffocating weight of hypocrisy. 23 people were squeezed around the extended oak table, the same table I used to do my homework on while my mother praised Sloane's finger paintings. I sat at the far end, Julian's hand a steadying anchor on my knee beneath the tablecloth. Across from me, Uncle Silas gave me a subtle, knowing nod. The rest of the table, however, treated me like a cold front that had ruined a picnic. My cousins whispered, my aunts offered tight, pitying smiles. Alina stood up, clinking her wine glass with a silver spoon. Everyone, attention please, she beamed, her eyes landing on me with the predatory glint of a hawk. As you know, our family has hit a bit of a rough patch. Sloane's beautiful boutique is struggling and we've all been worried, but today we celebrate, because my oldest daughter, Alara, has finally remembered where she came from. She's flown all the way from her penthouse in Boston to help us bridge the gap. Alara, honey, did you bring the documents we discussed? The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment she had engineered, the public shaming masked as a request for charity. I did, Mom, I said. I reached down and pulled the heavy manila envelope from my bag. The sound of the metal clasp opening felt like the cocking of a hammer. I have everything right here, I continued, my voice steady, projecting to the corners of the room. But before we talk about the $50,000 for Sloane, I think we need to clear up some confusion about the last $86,000. I stood up and began walking around the table. Uncle Silas, could you pass these down? Aunt Sarah, take a look at page 2. I started handing out color-coded packets, not just one copy. But 23, what is this? Alina's voice faltered, her smile twitching. Alara, this isn't the time for. This, I interrupted, is a timeline. Page 1 shows the deed of reconveyance for this house, dated 7 years ago. The mortgage was paid in full. Yet on page 2, you'll see 72 consecutive bank transfers from my account to my mother's, totaling $86,400, money she told me was keeping this roof over your heads. A collective murmur rippled through the room. My father, who had been quiet all evening, squinted at the paper in front of him. Alina, the bank notice you showed me last month. It had this same logo, but the numbers. And turn to page 4, I said, moving toward Sloane, who was looking at her SUV keys on the table as if they had turned into a snake. That's the registration for the emergency vehicle I co-signed for, the one I'm still paying $450 a month for. It was gifted to Sloane 2 years ago, not as a loan, but as a reward for her hard work. Alara, stop this, Alina hissed, reaching for the papers. You're embarrassing yourself, you're attacking your family. No, Mom, I said, leaning over the table, my shadow falling across her plate. I'm auditing the family. You told everyone here that I abandoned you. You told them I was a selfish elitist who wouldn't give you a dime. While you were saying those words, you were depositing my checks. You didn't just steal my money, you tried to steal my place in this family so I wouldn't have anyone to turn to when I found out. The silence that followed was absolute. The celebration of resilience had become a crime scene. Alina looked around the table, searching for a friendly face, but even the cousins who had blocked my number were staring at the cold, hard numbers in their hands. The facade hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated. The silence in the room was brittle, the kind that precedes a total collapse. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, her face oscillating between a deep, shameful crimson and a ghostly pale. She looked at the papers scattered across the table, the evidence of her 6-year heist, and then at my father. Arthur, she's twisting things, Alina stammered, her voice thin and reedy. I was saving that money for a rainy day for the family's future. My father, who had spent the last decade being the quiet background noise to my mother's constant static, didn't look at her. He was staring at page 1 of my packet, the University of Washington graduation date. His hands, calloused and trembling slightly, traced the printed date, June 14th. You told me the ceremony was canceled, Alina, he whispered. The room felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. I frowned, the anger in my chest flickering into confusion. What do you mean, Dad? I sent the invites, I sent the maps. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw him, really saw him. There was a hollowed out grief in his eyes that made the $86,000 feel like pocket change. I was there, Alara, he said, his voice cracking. I drove to the stadium. I was sitting in the parking lot, waiting for your mother and Sloane to meet me. I had a bouquet of those yellow lilies you liked. I was so damn proud. He turned his gaze toward my mother, his voice growing steady with a terrifying, quiet rage. But then Alina called me. She was hysterical. She said Sloane had been in a terrible car accident on the way. She said they were at the emergency room and that I needed to get there immediately. She told me not to call you because she didn't want to ruin your big walk with bad news. She said she'd handle telling you later. The table gasped. Uncle Silas slammed his fist down, making the silverware dance. I left Alara, my father continued, a tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. I sped across the city, heart in my throat. When I got to the house, not the hospital, the house, there was no accident, there was just a party. A surprise engagement party for Sloane. Alina told me the hospital was a misunderstanding and that the graduation had been moved to a private ceremony anyway because of a security threat. She said you were already on your way to the engagement party and that if I made a scene, I'd ruin your night. I felt the room spin. It wasn't just a skipped graduation, it was a calculated extraction. She had physically removed the only person who cared enough to show up, ensuring I would look out at those 3 empty seats and feel utterly, completely alone. She wanted me broken, because broken people are easier to control. Broken people don't ask for receipts. You used my daughter's heart to pay for your other daughter's vanity, my father said, standing up. He looked at the manila envelope, then at his wife of 30 years, as if she were a stranger he just met on a dark street. Arthur, I did it for us, Alina cried, reaching for his arm. He pulled away. There is no us in a house built on lies, Alina. I spent 7 years thinking my daughter hated me for missing her day. I spent 7 years wondering why she only sent money and never came home. And all that time, you were the one holding the door shut. He walked over to me, and for the first time since I was a child, he pulled me into a hug. He smelled like old cedar and heartbreak. I'm so sorry, Alara, he whispered into my hair. I should have stayed in that seat. The silence that followed my father's confession wasn't empty, it was heavy with the finality of a closing door. I didn't stay for the rest of the dinner. There was no point in watching the remaining embers of the family unit burn out. Julian and I walked out into the cool Seattle night, leaving behind a room full of people who finally had to look at the truth without a filter. The next morning, I didn't call a lawyer, I called my bank. I revoked the recurring $1,200 transfer. I called the lending agency for the SUV and initiated a refinance process that would require Sloane to either take over the loan entirely or surrender the vehicle. For the first time in 6 years, my paycheck belonged to me. The fallout was swift and clinical. Alina's reputation among the extended family was incinerated. Uncle Silas and the cousins didn't just stop talking to her, they began their own audits of years of small lies and borrowed favors. She moved into the guest room, a stranger in a house that I had unwittingly paid for, facing a husband who now only spoke to her in monosyllables. Sloane's boutique closed 3 months later. Without my monthly subsidies flowing through my mother's account to cover her emergencies, the reality of her poor business sense finally caught up to her. She sent me a long, rambling email blaming me for her downfall. I didn't reply, I just marked it as read and archived it. Some blueprints are simply too flawed to be salvaged. A few months later, my father called. Alara, he said, his voice sounding lighter though still weary. I'm staying with Silas for a while. I've filed for a legal separation. I'm trying to find those yellow lilies again to start over. I'd like that, Dad, I replied. We started small. Weekly phone calls that didn't involve money. Digital photos of my projects in Boston. He even flew out to see the penthouse. When he walked in and saw the view I had built for myself, he didn't ask what it cost. He just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You always did have a gift for seeing the big picture." I still look at that manila envelope sometimes. It sits in the bottom drawer of my desk, a reminder that the most important structures we build aren't made of steel or glass. They're made of boundaries. I am no longer the bank ATM or the selfish scapegoat. I am the architect of my own life, and in this house, the seats are never empty. Because I only invite the people who actually want to be there, I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Do you think Alara did the right thing by dropping the receipts at a public family dinner, or should she have confronted her mother privately? Let me know your honest opinion in the comments below.